Subcommittee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. We welcome everyone to this morning's hearing. I'll begin by recognizing myself for an opening statement. Administrator Milgram, welcome to the subcommittee. I'd like to extend our heartiest relations with you. You're here to testify regarding DEA's fiscal 24 budget request. We all know that DEA plays a critical role in combating drug trafficking, reducing drug-related violence, and protecting our communities from the devastating effects of drug abuse. Drug addiction and overdose deaths have become one of the most pressing public health crises in America today. And the impact of fentanyl, a synthetic opioid, has been particularly devastating. Fentanyl is 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine, making it extremely dangerous even in small amounts. In 2021, more than 107,000 people in the U.S. died from drug overdoses, an increase of nearly 15% from the previous year. In Kentucky alone, we lost over 2,250 people to drug overdoses in 2021, and fentanyl was involved in many of these deaths. We're told that of that 107 nationally, 107,000, that roughly 70% of those deaths was fentanyl related. United States counter-narcotics policy regarding China has shifted to preventing Chinese-sourced fentanyl precursors from entering the U.S. Fentanyl supply chain via third countries up, and targeting illicit fentanyl-related financial flows linked to China. Today, it appears Mexican drug cartels are largely responsible for the production of U.S. consumed illicit fentanyl. The cartels use Chinese-sourced primary materials to produce much of the illicit fentanyl found in the U.S. today. I understand the DEA has been working closely with our Mexican counterparts to target these criminal organizations, but we need to do more to disrupt their operations and bring those responsible to justice. That's why the work of the DEA is critical to our national security. And I look forward to discussing the agency's budget request and its plans for addressing these urgent challenges. To achieve success, the DEA must ensure the agency is efficiently and strategically utilizing the resources at its disposal. The agency's fiscal 24 budget request is about $2.7 billion. That's a 3.8% increase over the current level. I'm committed to working with my colleagues on this subcommittee to ensure the DEA has the tools necessary to effectively enforce our drug laws and to protect the health and safety of all Americans. But we must also ensure the agency and its leadership that are always operating as efficiently and appropriately with taxpayer dollars as possible. The impact of this drug crisis on our communities is profound, and it's particularly acute in my home state of Kentucky, including the 5th Congressional District that I represent. I've seen firsthand the devastating toll that drug addiction can take on families and communities. I've met with parents who've lost children and with law enforcement officials who are doing everything they can to stop the flow of drugs into our state. I want to take a moment and thank Administrator Ann Milgram and the entire DEA team for their hard work and dedication to this important, critical mission. We value your service, and we appreciate the sacrifices that you make to keep our communities safe. And I would also especially like to thank the Administrator for attending Operation Unite, the annual Prescription Drug Summit earlier this month in Atlanta, Georgia. We had some 4,000 people there from every nook and cranny of the country and the world, including most of the federal, state, local agencies that deal with overdose addiction deaths. So thank you for taking part in that great summit. That's the 12th annual that we put together. It started out as a group that I put together in my own district 15 years ago when we were hit with OxyContin, called Unite, Unlawful Narcotics Investigations, Treatment, Education, holistic, simultaneous attack on the problem. It worked locally, so we decided to take it national with the National Drug Summit, and it's proved terrific. So thank you for that especially. Administrator, I look forward to hearing from you today and learning more about the agency's plans for the coming year, and especially we are anxious to hear about your work undoing the cartels, which is the railroad of fentanyl and others coming into the country. We pledge our support to help you rid us of the cartels. So we look forward to hearing from you and learning about your plans for the coming year. And I yield back now the balance of my time. Let me turn to Mr. Cartwright for any remarks he would like.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And allow me to take this opportunity to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for forming Operation Unite in your district and for what this has grown into. I also attended, along with 3 other members on this subcommittee, the Prescription and Illicit Drug Summit at the Georgia World Congress Center in Atlanta. And Administrator Milgram, thank you for attending that as well. It's efforts like that where we all work together and all different disciplines get together and listen to each other that are going to be part of the solution.
Will the gentleman yield? Will the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Well, I want to thank you for coming to the summit, along with others. It was a great success, and you helped make it so with your panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I join you in welcoming Administrator Ann Milgram in her first appearance before this subcommittee. Good luck to you, to discuss the DEA's fiscal year 2024 budget request. 50 years ago, the DEA was established to address the growing problem of drugs in the United States, to consolidate the enforcement of a newly enacted Controlled Substances Act. Then President Nixon had declared an all-out global war on the drug menace and had charged DEA to be the lead federal law enforcement agency at the front line in this war. In 1973, DEA was a little more than 1/5 of its current workforce, with a budget of $75 million, staffed with 1,470 special agents deployed domestically and internationally, a quarter of its current special agent workforce today. Certainly, the drug enforcement challenges of the 1970s remain with us today, but it is safe to say the evolution of this 50-year war from plant-based narcotics such as cocaine, heroin, and marijuana to those made in laboratories, synthetic drugs that require no growing season, that has amassed an increasing number of casualties. And the chairman's right, 107,000 Americans a year are perishing from this, and we can't work hard enough to counter it. In 2017, the Department of Health and Human Services declared the opioid crisis a public health emergency. Synthetic opioids, precursor chemicals, and pill presses were flooding into the U.S. through international mail. In response, Congress enacted the STOP Act in 2018 to help curb the flow of these drugs into the country. The rapid evolution of e-commerce, especially during the pandemic, further exacerbated the problem of opioid misuse. Mexican cartels, these are evil people who do not care how many Americans die, even on their first ingestion of fentanyl. Mexican cartels opted to leverage their existing business model to import precursor chemicals from China to produce these synthetic opioids, such as fentanyl, to meet a growing demand that they're helping create. A demand that has resulted, as I say, in 107,000 U.S. deaths in just the last year. The accessibility and affordability of these drugs leaves DEA and its federal, state, and local partners in a continuous state of defensive posture to keep dangerous narcotics out of our community and successfully to combat drug trafficking networks who are responsible. Now, at the same time, I have to express my very strong opposition to the House majority's plan as included in the legislation that passed the House last night, barely and on partisan lines, to implement drastic cuts in discretionary spending. This will enormously damage the work of non-defense agencies like the DEA. And I believe Congress has to instead continue to build on the investments that we've made to provide the DEA with the resources you need to address the existing and emerging challenges in this war on drugs. Responsible resources provided by this subcommittee over the past few years have helped aid DEA's efforts, including its work that led to the indictment of several leaders of the Sinaloa cartel 2 weeks ago. Our continued investment in DEA sends a clear signal to our adversaries on the global stage that we will not allow this attack on our people, on our communities to continue without consequence, and that those responsible will be held accountable by our justice system. So, Administrator Milgram, I want to applaud the work of the men and women of the DEA, and I look forward to working with you on how we can best invest in the agency in fiscal year 2024 to continue this all-important war on drugs in America. I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Cartwright. As you can see, we are of one accord on this subcommittee. It's a nonpartisan, bipartisan effort that we want to maintain and to assist you in that work. We will endeavor to be respectful of our witnesses' time and will follow up with you should we have any additional questions. So, Administrator Milgram, you're recognized for an opening statement. Without objection, your written statement will be entered into the record. Welcome.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, Congressman Rogers, Congressman Cartwright, and members of the committee. Americans today are experiencing the most devastating drug crisis in our nation's history. It is like nothing we have ever seen before. This is because one drug, fentanyl, has transformed the criminal landscape. Fentanyl is cheap to make, easy to disguise, and deadly to those who take it. Just 2 milligrams, the equivalent of a few grains of salt, can kill a person. It is now the leading cause of death for Americans between the ages of 18 and 45. More than cancer, more than COVID, more than terrorism, more than heart disease. And it is killing Americans from all walks of life and in every state and every community across this country. Nearly 200 Americans per day. The drug cartels responsible for bringing fentanyl into this country are ruthless and extremely violent criminal enterprises. They rely on a global supply chain to manufacture and traffic fentanyl. And they rely on a global illicit finance network to pocket billions of dollars from those drug sales. At DEA, we have undertaken a transformation to meet this moment. We have transformed our vision. We are now laser focused on fentanyl, the drug that is killing the most Americans. We are laser focused on the 2 cartels, Sinaloa and Jalisco, that are responsible for the vast majority of fentanyl that is flooding our communities. We have transformed our plan. We have built an entirely new strategic layer on top of all 334 DEA offices worldwide to target the Sinaloa cartel and the Jalisco cartel. These teams are made up of experienced special agents, intelligence analysts, data scientists, targeters, and chemical and finance experts from across the agency. These teams centralize all of DEA's information and intelligence, and they are mapping the criminal threat in more than 40 countries across the world. We have transformed our execution. We are drawing on the talent and intelligence of our law enforcement teams in our more than 334 offices worldwide. And we are working as one DEA to defeat the Sinaloa and Jalisco cartels. We have made all of these changes in the last 2 years to save lives, to stop fentanyl, and to defeat the drug cartels that are responsible for killing Americans. And we are already starting to see results. On April 14th, we announced indictments against the Chapitos, the leaders of the Sinaloa cartel, along with their criminal network. The DEA and our law enforcement partners took down El Chapo, the leader of the Sinaloa cartel for many years, and he's now serving a life sentence in a U.S. prison. But El Chapo's sons, Ovidio, Ivan, and Alfredo, known as Los Chapitos, became the new leaders of the Sinaloa cartel. They inherited a global drug trafficking empire, and they made it more ruthless, more violent, more deadly, and they used it to spread a new poison, fentanyl. Let me be clear. The Chapitos pioneered the manufacture and trafficking of the deadly fentanyl that is flooding our country today and that is responsible for countless American deaths. As a direct result of their actions, we have lost hundreds of thousands of American lives. And so the DEA has proactively targeted the Chapitos, and we have followed their network across the globe. To China, where the Chapitos partner with precursor chemical suppliers. They buy precursors or the ingredients necessary to make fentanyl from Chinese chemical companies. To Mexico, the home base of the Sinaloa cartel, where the Chapitos run secret laboratories, transform the fentanyl precursor chemicals into fentanyl powder and pills, and smuggle it into the United States by land, by air, by sea, and by underground tunnel. And in the United States, where the fentanyl makes its way from stash houses along the southwest border, across our country, reaching both coasts and every single community in between. The Chapitos can control this global criminal enterprise, and they use ruthless violence to protect it. Their whole operation relies on death and destruction. To dominate the fentanyl supply chain, the Chapitos kill, kidnap, and torture anyone who gets in the way. In Mexico, they fed their enemies alive to tigers, electrocuted them, waterboarded them, and shot them at close range with a .50 caliber machine gun. To drive addiction, the Chapitos hide fentanyl in pills that look like oxycodone, Xanax, or Percocet. They mix fentanyl in with cocaine, heroin, and meth, all to induce Americans to take fentanyl without knowing it and to get them hooked. The Chapitos know that their product is deadly. These are the same people who gave fentanyl to a man, watched him die, and then sent that very same batch of fentanyl to the United States. They know that they are poisoning and killing Americans, and they don't care because they are making billions of dollars. They act with deliberate, calculated treachery, and their greed is shocking and without bounds. The indictments we announced on April 28th charged 28 members of this global network. 8 members of that network are now in custody, 7 of them overseas, and we are requesting their extradition. 20 remain at large in China and Mexico, and we are requesting their arrest. This case should send a clear message to the Chapitos and to criminal drug networks around the world that the men and women of the DEA will relentlessly pursue them to save American lives and to protect our national security. But this is just the beginning. The 10,000 employees that I have the privilege of working with every day at DEA are the most committed and mission-driven people that I have ever worked with in law enforcement. They're laser focused on one goal: to save American lives. As administrator, I have worked hard to empower our teams with the people, the technology, and the resources that we need to confront the current crisis. But we all must do more. Our mission has never been more critical to defeat the Sinaloa and Jalisco cartels that are flooding the United States with fentanyl. Every day at DEA headquarters, I walk past the Faces of Fentanyl Memorial. It's a memorial in our lobby that we started almost a year ago, where we display the faces of the American lives that have been lost to the fentanyl poisoning epidemic. We started it in May 2021 with about 100 faces on our wall. To date, we have received nearly 5,000 photos. The youngest on our wall is Serenity Faith, forever 17 months old. The oldest is James Cox, forever 70 years old. This wall is a memorial to the lives that have been lost, and it is a call to action to the men and women at DEA that our mission and our job is to save American lives. Every day, the men and women across our 334 offices around the globe risk their lives to protect the United States of America. I ask for Congress's continued support so that together we may protect the national security, public safety, and health of the American people. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Administrator. We will now proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions for the witness. I'll begin by recognizing myself. Number one, Madam Administrator, we salute you for the courage that you are showing and the determination to go after the cartels. We all know and have been told a million times that the cartels are the voyagers that are killing our kids with fentanyl, but we have not been brave enough to take them on. And I salute you for doing just that. And those efforts of the last few weeks, where you are arresting, regardless of where they are, members of these cartels. And we back you on that. And we urge you to keep going in that direction and making things happen. Will those 38 people who were charged, how many of those have been arrested?
Thank you, Congressman. There are 28 individuals that have been charged. 8 are now in custody around the world.
And are they in different countries?
Yes, sir. Right now, of those 8 individuals, 1 is in the United States. 6 of them are in Guatemala, Colombia, and Greece. 1 is in Mexico. Ovidio Guzman was arrested by Mexican authorities in January of this year. 20 remain at large, 4 Chinese nationals and 16 Mexican nationals.
Did I hear you say El Chapo?
One of El Chapo's sons, Ovidio Guzman, was arrested on prior DEA investigations. He was arrested in those arrest warrants were already in Mexico, and Ovidio Guzman was arrested in January of this year.
Is he still in jail?
Yes, sir.
Is Mexico cooperating?
I appreciate that question. And as we've shown with the Chupitos, the home base of Sinaloa and all of their network operations, the home base is in Mexico. There are 16 individuals and Ovidio who are still there. Our top priority right now is to get those 17 Mexican nationals into the United States to stand justice in a U.S. court of law. So we are going to Mexico now to ask for their assistance in arresting the 16 individuals who remain at large and extraditing them to the United States. I would also just take a moment, Mr. Chairman, to note that there is another individual in custody in Mexico that we are very much seeking his extradition, and that's Rafael Caro Quintero, who was arrested by Mexico last year. We salute the men and women of the Mexican military and law enforcement, many of whom died in capturing both RCQ and Ovidio. and it's our top priority to get RCQ, Ovidio, and these other 16 Mexican nationals into the U.S.
Is the Mexican government cooperating?
So we're very focused on Mexico. And if I could, let me speak to one piece and then come back to that. One of the things that we have learned over the last 2 years in the work we've done with our counter threat teams and our work that we're doing across the globe in mapping the cartels is to now understand that these two networks are operating in 45 countries around the world. So it is vital that we continue to do the work that we're doing in Mexico and in China. And we are also now able to do work in many other countries around the world. Now, as to Mexico, we all need to do more. We at DEA are doing more. We want to work with Mexico so that they can work with us and do more to get everyone in custody, to destroy the secret labs, and to stop fentanyl from coming into the United States of America.
Is the Department of Justice seeking the extradition of these people back here?
Yes, sir. The Department of Justice, we're working very closely with the Department of Justice, our Office of International Affairs, on all of these pieces to get these individuals into a U.S. court of law.
Well, congratulations on the activities you've just described to us. That's a great start. I emphasize the word start. We're going to help you do your job with adequate funding, but we're going to expect real results with people behind bars at the very least. So thank you very much for that report on a very important and crucial effort that I think, as you have said, will put the fear of God into the cartels, wherever they are, and they're everywhere, including every community in the United States of America. So we salute you for the great work. My colleagues on the Defense Subcommittee recently informed me of the existence of a, quote, strategic implementation plan to commercially disrupt the illicit fentanyl supply chain. We've been unable to obtain a copy of that report thus far. I think it's called the SIP, Strategic Implementation Plan. We asked DEA for this last week, but we've not yet received a concrete response. Can you help us out?
Congressman, we can take that back and work on it. What I can tell you from my involvement in that process is that the conversation was about how we can have a whole of government response to this fentanyl crisis. I'd give you just one example of how I think we're working together from the Chapitos investigation. The Treasury Department issued a series of OFAC sanctions on 2 Chinese chemical companies, 4 Chinese nationals, and the Guatemalan chemical broker that we charged in the Chapitos investigation. The State Department has put upwards of $50 million in rewards on top of the remaining defendants in the Chapitos investigation that are not yet in custody. So my involvement in it was really to think about how do we work together across all the government agencies to be effective at stopping what I believe is the greatest drug threat our nation has ever faced.
Well, we're going to help you do your job, and we also appropriate the funds for the Department of Justice, as well as other related organizations. And it's going to take a whole of government attack. The cartels are the closest thing we've seen to organized crime, and the network that choked the country under that system. But it took a whole of government approach with all agencies going as one to defeat the cartels. And but I'm a little prosecutor, and law enforcement people sometimes are jealous of each other and don't cooperate to the fullest extent. We will not tolerate that. So thank you for your great work. Mr. Cartwright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Milgram, according to the Department of Justice, a 22% cut to DEA could, quote, amplify the supply of illicit drugs and cause a proliferation in the violence associated with the drug trade, unquote. Could you talk a little bit more about how such a drastic DEA budget cut would impact our local communities, and how many additional drug poisoning deaths over top of 107,000 a year would effectively result from such a drastic cut in DEA's budget?
Thank you, Congressman. The men and women of DEA have been working for years doing what I would describe as doing more with less. And we have come to a moment in our nation's history where we need to do more with more to be effective, to stop the current threat, to save American lives. A 22% cut would be devastating for our budget. We have 432 individuals in process to bring on as DEA agents. We could not hire them. We are in the midst of transforming our technology and our data because we have to, because we have not had a new technology data system in over 20 years. There are men and women at DEA headquarters on our counter-threat teams mapping the cartels across the United States and the world. They had to spend by hand time, 3 days, putting in 18,000 separate records so that we can do the work we need to do for the American public to track cartel members around the world. The men and women of DEA do it, and they do it without complaining, but they shouldn't have to. We need to build these systems for our future. We need to become the most agile law enforcement agency that we can be.
And now, DEA is on the front lines of this war. It is a high-profile frontline agency, and certainly it gets itself into the news from time to time with its share of criticism for alleged improprieties. I share the chairman's sentiments. We back you. We back you in this war, but we do have a duty of oversight, and we do rely heavily on the Office of Inspector General to look into those allegations. In fact, we had Inspector General Horowitz as our first witness, a practice that I intend to follow, Mr. Chairman, if I ever get my hand on that gavel again. But Mr. Horowitz did testify, and my sole question on that score is, Administrator Milgram, can we rely on you to assist and facilitate Mr. Horowitz in his inquiries wherever they might lead him?
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you for raising what I think is an important issue for us to discuss. We are transforming DEA, and over the last 2 years, we have hired and promoted more than 800 people, most of those from within the agency, some of them from outside the agency. In every decision, I have sought to work with integrity and urgency to follow the longstanding practices at DEA and to build an incredible team to face the greatest drug threat our nation has ever faced. I have deep respect for the Inspector General. He is conducting an administrative inquiry into some DEA contracts. I welcome that. That process has to play out, and I'm going to stay focused, laser focused, on saving American lives, defeating the cartels, and stopping fentanyl from killing Americans.
Thank you for that. Now, we were talking about money just now. We're talking about our own investment in money. Well, the people on the other end of this war are investing money. Do we have any sense of how much the cartels are investing in their production and distribution of narcotics into the United States in a particular given fiscal year?
Congressman, that's a good question. We have a sense of how much money they are making. We know that it is billions of dollars. We also know that from the time I was a local prosecutor doing drug cases, the entire drug trafficking world has changed because of fentanyl. It's cheaper for them to make, it's easier for them to make, and they are able to use all of the tools of the modern world, encryption, social media, cryptocurrency, to operate this global criminal enterprise. So while I couldn't tell you exact dollar amounts, what I can tell you is that as part of For example, the money laundering investigations that we do, there are hundreds of millions of dollars that we see every single day that the cartels, Sinaloa and Jalisco, are moving worldwide.
Thank you for that. I'll have more questions later. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome. We're
Sir.
really glad to hear from you. Got a tough job. But I got a curiosity that I want to talk to you about. The Texas border between Mexico and Texas is 1,200 miles long. You been out there?
I have been out to the border, yes, sir.
Okay, well, the road, paved road ends at Del Rio, and gravel road goes from there up until you get to the lower valley of El Paso. That's a pretty good ways, and there are no electric charging stations that I know of anywhere down there. I know that valley pretty well. I've been down there. I worked almost exclusively in the valley 20 years ago. But the president's budget has requested zero-emission vehicles for the DEA. Now, the best zero-emissions vehicle we currently have is a Tesla. And they're fun to drive. They go fast. But they only go fast for about 290 to 320 miles, and then they stop. Now, why would we want to invest in zero-emission vehicles to chase bad guys if they can't catch them before they run out of fuel? Because there's no places to charge those things down the valley. And why would we do that right now? Do you think that policy that the president's budget has put forward on you is a good investment at this time? Maybe sometime in the future, but not today. I'd like your opinion on that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Congressman, for raising what I think is, we've asked Congress for additional funds, and we're also deeply grateful. We got $40 million additional dollars last year. The primary asks that we have are $10 million to continue our data and tech transformation and $9 million for our targeting teams and for our Operation Overdrive. There's also a funding request because of the president's executive order on electric vehicles. And so the president's executive order requires that go forward.
So what good are they chasing bad guys?
What I would say to you, Congressman, is that the single most important thing we can do to save American lives today is to take those investments into our counter threat teams, into our Operation Overdrive, into the transformation of our data and technology. For the first time, we've built this layer on top of all of DEA, pulling all of our information of all the bad guys that are operating across the U.S. and the world, and we are now able to action that. So my commitment to you is that I'm going to do everything I can, and the men and women of DEA are going to do everything we can to do the work that needs to be done.
And that's fine. Everybody going to the DEA local office and the international offices and all that fact, that they may be driving Teslas. But I'm interested in 1,200 miles of Texas border. And they can't drive 1,200 miles of Texas border. And believe it or not, we are the highway in America for all these drugs. They come through my state 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and a lot of people get chased by them. Now, the electric vehicle is very, very fast for a certain period of time. But if you're chasing somebody up the road between Del Rio and El Paso on a gravel road, somebody's going to be stranded out around Hudspeth County, and they're not going to get out of that place until somebody brings them a charge. That makes no sense at all. None. And so, I mean, just common sense tells you that where the enemy is, we can't use that kind of vehicle. Wouldn't you say that's true?
Congressman, I understand, and I have had the opportunity to go to the border, and as you saw, and as I just talked about, we're tracking the entire supply chain, and that includes the fentanyl coming across the border. And so I am focused on this, as are you, and I don't believe we have a single Tesla at DEA. I will confirm that for
Whatever
you.
you're buying, I don't know what you're buying.
I understand, but we have many cars. I am committed to you, and I will make a promise to you that we will do what we need to do across the border to be effective at defeating the cartels and saving American lives.
Time of the gentleman has expired.
I'm sorry?
Mr. Reppersberger.
Yes, thank you. First thing, there's a, I don't know how many former prosecutors are right now, but those of us who were, know how difficult it is drug enforcement is. And you get the bad guys, and you got bad guys right there. Sons and take care of them. The issue of where you are, I've always felt in the city that DEA was always at the bottom of the food chain. FBI and the FBI, especially the ones on the street, because it's some of the most dangerous places that happen. And I think it's really important that we keep, and this committee, keep looking at that. I'm really shocked, and I've worked with a lot of these people in this room, and I respect them. And I'm really shocked, and I've just with the comments that our chairman made, that we have got to put more resources and money into national security, and we have to put them into what you do in law enforcement, if you want to call them that. From where you are, I've heard good things about the people respect you, that you're trying to redo some of the things that have been done before, because more efficient, but when you have less, you've got to do those type of things. So I thank you for that. Now, just from the point of view where we are now, and what are your highest priorities? You know you're going to be at the bottom of the food chain again, but what you do is as important as anything we do in other parts of the world too, and it's affecting people in the United States every day. You made the comment that this is probably the worst that it's ever been, and I would probably agree with you, especially with the fentanyl, and now we're dealing with that. So, where, from a priority point of view, and I'm glad the comments made by the chairman that we're going to help you, and with that means money. So, at least we have one or two of you over there that are going to work with trying to get you what you need. And so this budget process is a long way off, but you need help, and we're going to try to give it to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Give me some of your priorities.
Thank you, Congressman. If I could start by agreeing with you that I believe that this is a national security issue. It is a national security issue for the United States.
And let me say this. The drug cartels, they were nasty, mean. They'd cut one finger off, and then they cut another. They let you live a month and torture you. But now they have as much money as we have, and they're more sophisticated, and they can hire people, and they can hire technology. So.
Thank you, sir. Here are the priorities that we have set at DEA. Number one, defeat the two cartels that are responsible for the fentanyl that is killing Americans, the Sinaloa cartel and the Jalisco cartel. To do that, again, we're mapping those networks across the globe. We've mapped more than 6,000 members across more than 40 countries. And there are a number of other ways we're also doing that work. One of them is taking a network approach, like you've seen with the Chapitos case. We're no longer just focused on taking out the top of those networks, because we know they are so vast that we have to attack the network at their core at every single part of the supply chain. Second, we're trying to save American lives in our communities across the country. We're focused on drug poisoning investigations, and we're also focused on drug-related violence. Third, we're working every day, and I'm grateful to members of this committee, to Operation Unite. We're trying to raise public awareness. Too many Americans still do not know how deadly fentanyl is, and a part of that is because the cartels are intentionally hiding it. They are disguising it as fake pills that look identical to oxycodone. They are hiding it in cocaine and heroin and meth. So public awareness, we believe, saves lives. We're also doing a data and tech transformation. We have to transform. As you just noted correctly, the cartels have evolved. They have evolved. They have harnessed all of the tools of the modern world, and they don't follow any rules. And DEA has to transform so that our men and women have every piece of information that is accessible to them across our 334 offices. Everything we know, they have to know. We have to be doing things in a way that create the best systems for our management internally, but really, we have to be using our data and our information to go back to our top priority, which is to defeat the cartels.
You bet. Thank you.
I spoke yesterday with the FBI director. He'll testify later today before the subcommittee, but he agrees on the need to do in the cartels. So the whole of government approach, I think, is something you've started, and I'm hopeful that it will sweep the government. Mr. Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Administrator. The honorable men and women in your agency, 10,000 strong, play a vital role in intercepting dangerous, deadly drugs before they end up in the hands of unsuspecting Americans, killing Americans. You have 3 Texans on this subcommittee who are intimately involved in combating drugs right on the front lines, as are your employees. So thank you for being here. You know, as you said, we are facing a fentanyl crisis. It's impacting every state. According to CDC data, the U.S. suffered over 100,000 drug deaths in 2021, and of those deaths, over 70,000 were from fentanyl, which amounts to about 195 deaths a day. And I understand and appreciate that you are aware of that and respecting each and every one of those in your headquarters with the memorial that you have. Now, I just wish that the rest of this administration shared your concern. In the first 6 months of this fiscal year, under the open border policies of President Biden, fentanyl smuggling has already surpassed FY21 levels and is on track to surpass FY22 levels this month. With that, it's unfortunate that the dedicated DEA agents in the field can't keep up with an administration that continues to actively work against your efforts and enable this crisis through the weak policies that this administration has toward the communist leadership in China and our own soft underbelly that is the Mexican government and on our southern border. You know, one stark difference that exists between the current and the previous administration has been our posture towards China. While under pressure from the Trump White House, China agreed to designate fentanyl as a controlled substance. Meanwhile, China announced last August that they will suspend their counter-narcotics cooperation agreement. I know that the administration doesn't assign responsibility for China policy with the DEA, and that might not be such a bad thing, but can you speak to what the administration is doing beyond DEA to hold China accountable for its part in fentanyl trafficking, because I know that affects you directly?
Congressman, if I could start by saying that I share your concerns about what we're seeing happen in China. Right now, because synthetic drugs are what the 2 cartels are making, they're all man-made with chemicals. The vast majority of those chemicals are coming from China. And so the only limit on how many fentanyl pills and how much fentanyl powder the cartels can make, the only limit is how many chemicals they can buy. And that is not acceptable.
Would it help your efforts if we were tougher with China? Trade policy.
We right now, I can speak for what we see at DEA. You said yourself, we do not have any counter-narcotics cooperation in China. In the Chupitos indictment, we specifically allege that Chinese nationals knew, the people we've charged in this case, we've alleged that they knew that these chemicals were being used to make fentanyl. They took steps to hide the fact that they are fentanyl precursor chemicals. And so we believe that we have to be doing everything we can to target this part of the supply chain, which is the beginning. It is the beginning. Is
it your opinion that China would qualify as a major drug transit or major illicit drug producing country?
Congressman, I'm gonna not engage in putting labels on it from my perspective at DEA as a law enforcement agency, but what I can tell you is that I share your concerns. I agree with you. We've seen China act before. In 2019, they scheduled finished fentanyl, and essentially almost overnight, the finished fentanyl stopped coming to the United States. So we know that they could take action to stop this, and they need to do that.
And have you expressed that to the White House?
Congressman, I am very vocal in my views about what we need to do. Americans are dying.
What is the White House, how have they responded?
Americans are dying. Well, we were fortunate to be part of this strategic implementation plan where everybody's coming together. And again, I will exercise every single authority at DEA that the Congress gives me.
Well, I'm concerned, given that the president has failed to identify China in this way in his presidential determination memorandum, despite the immense flow of Chinese fentanyl precursor chemicals being sent straight to the cartels. The administration has failed to acknowledge the severity of the border crisis, let alone visit the border for himself. It's time that the administration be honest with the American people and call out China for what they are, complicit. And we want to help you, but you're making it hard for us, given the AP article that came out last week. So I will yield back and maybe have questions in a second round on that. But thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mrs. Ming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Administrator, for being here and for your important work. I want to ask about the joint operations you are conducting with local law enforcement. Back in March, your office and the New York Drug Enforcement Task Force, in conjunction with our New York State Attorney General James and Mayor Adams, the takedown of a firearm and drug trafficking operation. The seizure reportedly included 19 firearms, including 12 ghost guns, 6 high-capacity magazines, and more than 560 grams of cocaine. I'm grateful for your agents' partnership with NYPD and our state agencies to shut down drug and gun trafficking rings. But I am concerned that in fiscal year 24, you will not have sufficient resources to devote to these interagency partnerships, which will directly impact my constituents in New York City. Can you talk a little bit about what these partnerships with state and local drug enforcement task forces look like, and how your operations in places like my hometown of New York would be impacted if your budget were to return back to fiscal year 22 levels?
Thank you. We're talking about here, I believe, Operation Overdrive. And let me start by saying that the men and women of DEA work across the United States every single day with our state and local counterparts. When I came in, we were looking at a 30% increase in violence across the United States and a significant and devastating increase in drug poisoning deaths. So we stepped back, pulled all the data we could from DEA and across the United States to ask the question of where are the communities that are hardest hit in the United States, and then going into those communities and asking the question, where in those communities and who is responsible for being the shooters, the people who are killing Americans and their communities, and for selling the drugs that are responsible, the networks that are selling the drugs that are most responsible for drug poisoning deaths. We launched Operation Overdrive in 34 cities to start, and it's been effective. In Miami, we saw a 25% drop in homicides. In Philadelphia, we saw more than 40% decrease in fatal shootings. We've now expanded that to 57 cities and counties and towns across the United States. That second phase is sort of ending around now. We're finishing takedowns. There was a major takedown announced in Columbus, Ohio yesterday, and we have a series of takedowns and arrests. And we're targeting the most violent individuals in those communities that are engaged in drug trafficking, who we believe are likely to be the next shooters. And by doing that, we believe that we can significantly reduce community violence and save lives.
So if your budget were to return to, let's say, fiscal year 22 levels and capped at 1% growth over the next 10 years, how would that impact your operations and partnerships in places like New York City?
It would be devastating. And so one of our budget asks this year is for $9 million for our counter threat teams that target Sinaloa and Jalisco, and for Operation Overdrive. We are planning phase 3 of Operation Overdrive to tackle drug poisonings and drug violence in communities across the country. We seized almost 13,000 weapons last year. That kind of work is only possible with the support that we have had over the last year from Congress.
Thank you. And in your written testimony in a separate issue, you noted that retirements within the DEA special agent workforce have left you operating about 13% below your allocated positions. Wanted to ask how impacted would some of these operations to curtail drug trafficking and keep poison fentanyl off our streets be if you received less than your fiscal year 24 budget request? And again, how would this staffing impact hurt my constituents in New York City?
Congresswoman, I feel very strongly that we are at a moment in time where we have to do everything we can to counter the threat we're facing, which fentanyl is the deadliest drug threat we've ever seen, and we know who's driving it, we know what's happening. We can only continue to transform, to focus on the cartels, to focus on reducing violence and drug poisoning deaths with the support of Congress. If we took cuts, we would have across the board hiring freezes. We would not be able to bring agents on. We may have to furlough employees. We've got things in the work like the New England lab that will help us to make sure we never have a backlog on fentanyl testing in the United States. So there are countless ways in which we are transforming in order to meet the moment and to become the most agile law enforcement agency that we can be. That would stop. And every year, if we were capped at 1%, that means cuts. And that means cuts to our budget. And again, I think we've done a lot of work without a lot of funding for many years, and we can do more with more.
Mr. Garcia?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Administrator, thank you for being here. I want to start by just making sure that out of deference to the victims and their families, you've done an excellent job of calling these poisonings. These are not overdoses. The victims don't know they're taking fentanyl in many cases. They think they're taking Xanax, Vicodin, Oxycontin. I think that's very important. These are poisonings, not overdoses. I want to thank the agents in the DEA who are working hard on a daily basis. I want to thank the DEA for supporting us in California's 27th district. We had a rash, literally thousands of illegal marijuana grows in the high deserts of the Antelope Valley. The DEA supported that multi-level government operation. We fixed that problem. That looks tame compared to the fentanyl crisis that we have nationwide. I have a lot of questions, and they're straightforward, so I hope we can just get straightforward answers so we can get through this relatively quickly. But I'm reading the mission statement of the DEA: to enforce controlled substance laws and regulations and to prosecute individuals and organize that grow, manufacture, or distribute illegal substances. There's obviously more that you all do. The point of the DEA is to protect our nation against illegal drug activity and to prosecute the criminals that threaten us in that regard. How would you grade, over the course of the last 2 years, the DEA's progress relative to the mission statement?
Congressman, I think that the men and the women of the DEA are doing an incredible job to meet this moment and to save lives. I also believe that we are doing what we need to do, which is to transform our vision, the way we work, and how we execute on it in order to stop Americans from dying. And I believe that we're doing that.
I don't think you are. I'll be honest. I respect and appreciate the service of the DEA agents, but when you have 100,000 Americans die of these poisonings in a given year, and it's getting worse over time, to make the assertion as the administrator of the DEA that you're doing this job well, or that you're getting the job done, is frankly flagrant and offensive. I don't think you're doing a good job. I don't mean that to be disrespectful, but I do this in the interest of our nation's security. Self-awareness to our own performance matters, and this delusional mindset that we are actually doing our jobs well when it comes to this DEA mission is very dangerous. I don't share the enthusiasm of some of those in this room about your progress and your successes so far. I'm concerned when you say you tell the president very frequently, and you're very vocal about this situation, that you're not telling him the truth, or at least the reality of the situation on the ground. You just made the statement to our colleague, Mr. Klein, that you refuse to commit to calling China a major illicit drug trafficker producing country. Why are you reluctant to do so?
Congressman, if I could just clarify a couple of things, I appreciate the opportunity to do that.
Sure.
No one in the United States of America should think that what is happening is acceptable. And I want to be clear in saying that I do not think what is happening is acceptable.
I don't think you think it's
107,735.
acceptable, but what you said was you think you are doing a good job in preventing this from happening.
What I believe is that the men and women of DEA are transforming the way we work to attack the cartels at their core. We've only shown the beginning of the results. In the coming weeks and months, you will continue to see more of those results.
I am hopeful of that, but I think self-awareness and grounded realities matter in this regard. Let's go to a few just very straightforward questions again, because I think these are very important. My colleagues across the aisle talk about cuts being threatening to your budget. I would submit when the president asked for only a 3.8% increase to your budget in the midst of 7% inflation, call it, over the last 2 years, so really effectively approaching 20% when you compound over a 3-year period, that the president himself is actually cutting your budget. It's wild to me that we have this epidemic of fentanyl deaths, 100,000 a year poisoned from this chemical weapon of mass destruction, and the president deems a 3.8% increase to your budget appropriate when the rest of the budgets across all of the appropriation bills that we've been receiving are averaging something like 18% year-over-year increases. Show me your budgets, I'll show you your priorities, and when the president says 3.8% for the DEA, and you've got good solutions coming forward and the troops to do so, that's clear that the president is not hearing you, or you're not being vocal enough for saying the right things to the president. So I implore you to do a better job on that front. Does the open border hurt or help your mission?
Congressman, I understand the challenges at the U.S. border. The Chapitos.
It's a simple question. Does it hurt or help? Does the open border hurt or help your mission?
Here's what I see as the head of DEA, the head of a law enforcement agency. I believe that we have to attack the entire supply chain, and we have to stop fentanyl from coming into the U.S. at the border.
You're not answering the question. Does the open border help or hurt your mission?
Sir, I am trying my best to answer the question, which is, in a complex issue with the supply chain ranging from China to Mexico coming into the U.S., the border is an essential part of stopping fentanyl from coming into the United States. DEA, we play offense. We're attacking the cartels across the world and across the supply chain. And last year, just as an example, we took 410 million deadly doses of fentanyl off the streets of America. DHS, their prime responsibility, I would see us as two different sides of the same coin. We play offense, they play defense. Their mission is to stop the fentanyl from coming into the United States at the border. That's essential. The Chapitos investigation shows fentanyl is coming in by land, by air, by sea, through tunnels, because these cartels will stop at nothing to get it into the United States. That's how they make billions of dollars.
You did not answer the question. We'll save it for round two. I'm out of time. I yield back, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Clyde?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Administrator Milgram, for being here today. First, Mr. Chairman, I want to say thank you for leading the fight against illegal drugs with the RX Summit and Operation Unite that we participated in 2 weeks ago. I was honored to be there with you and with Ranking Member in that summit. I appreciate all the hard work you've done and continue to do in that regard.
Thank you.
Administrator Milgram, America is in the midst of a deadly fentanyl crisis, which is a major part of the drug overdose epidemic, and I know you're well aware of that, tragically claiming the lives of almost 107,000 Americans in 2021. In 2022, the DEA seized over 379 million deadly doses of fentanyl. One thing is clear, President Biden's open border policies, which have emboldened drug cartels, are both dangerous and deadly, and I truly wish you would have answered my colleague's question about the impact of the open border. American families should feel safe and be able to trust that federal agencies such as the DEA that are tasked with preventing these deadly drugs from flooding our communities are operating efficiently and effectively. Yet a truly disturbing report from the Associated Press shows an apparent abuse of contract authority, leaving Americans wondering if they can really trust the Biden administration's DEA to do the best job in protecting their families from illegal and lethal drugs such as fentanyl. Administrator, under your leadership, has the DEA awarded any no-bid contracts?
Congressman, I appreciate you raising this issue. As I've said, I think it's an important issue.
Just answer the question, ma'am.
As I've said, sir, the Inspector General is doing an administrative review of some DEA contracts. As I'm sure you know, we have thousands or at least hundreds of contracts. He's looking at some of them. I welcome that, and I'm not going to step in front of him out of respect for his work, and I'm going to continue to do my work.
How many no-bid contracts has the DEA awarded under your leadership?
Congressman, I couldn't give you the full number of sole source contracts. We can get back to you on that.
What about the dollar value?
We can get back to you on that.
All right, I appreciate you getting back to the committee on that. A report from the Associated Press on April the 19th, just last week, titled DEA Chief Faces Probe into Swampy Hires No-Bid Contracts, details how you are alleged to have been using your position to award nearly $4.7 million in no-bid contracts for strategic planning and communication, end quote, to people you knew from your days as New Jersey's Attorney General and as New York University law professor. Additionally, I understand that you are reportedly under investigation by the Department of Justice Inspector General for potential procurement fraud. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to submit 4 articles, these news articles for the record. The first one is GOP Senator demands DEA boss explain no-bid contracts, April 20th. DEA oversees review barely mentions corruption scandals, March 24th. DEA chief faces probe into swampy hires, no-bid contracts, April the 19th. And the DEA looks like a total mess right now, April the 19th, 2023, from Vice.com.
Without objection.
Thank you. Administrator Milgram, are you aware of these reports?
Congressman, I am.
You are. Great. Do you deny the allegations outlined in these reports?
Congressman, as I've said, the Inspector General is conducting an administrative review into some DEA contracts, which I welcome, and I'm not going to step in front of the Inspector General or speak more about it while that review is continuing.
Does that mean you're taking the fifth?
No, sir.
Okay, all right. You're not an investigator here. You are the reported object of the investigation.
Sir, the Inspector General is doing an administrative review of some DEA contracts.
Okay.
I respect him and his work, and we're going to let that play out.
All right. Do you know Boyd Johnson?
Congressman, I met Boyd Johnson after I was nominated to be the administrator. I spoke with hundreds of people before I came into office.
Okay. How would you characterize your relationship with Mr. Johnson prior to his contract work for the DEA?
I met him just before I came in as DEA administrator, sir.
Okay. Do you know Jose Cordero? And how would you characterize your relationship with Mr. Cordero prior to his contract work for the DEA?
Sir, Mr. Cordero worked with me previously on violence reduction.
Okay. As I understand it, Boyd Johnson's law firm, Wilmer Hale, was hired by yourself to conduct a review of the DEA's scandal-plagued foreign operations. The review was widely criticized as evidenced by an AP News report from March 24th that is in the record, titled DEA Overseas Review Barely Mentions Corruption Scandals. However, if you look a little deeper, it makes sense that the review is favorable to your agency. Additionally, according to the April 19th Vice News report, Jose Cordero's consulting group was hired as a contractor to vet DEA cases, and it was a $400,000 or almost $400,000 no-bid contract. These reports, are very disturbing to me. And I think what I'm seeing here, if they're correct, is that taxpayer dollars are using to pay people in lucrative no-bid contract deals to produce favorable results. And that's very, very, I think that's counter to the mission of the DEA here. I look forward to the DOJ Inspector General's report on these alleged practices. I think Americans deserve the best stewards of their hard-earned dollars, especially with regard to the DEA's core mission, which is so absolutely vitally important to this nation. As dangerous, lethal drugs continue to devastate our communities across the country, we need a dedicated and responsible individual who is above reproach leading the DEA. Everyone is afforded the presumption of innocence until proven guilty, but these reports are pretty strong. So I would, with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Elsey.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cartwright, Administrator Milger. Thank you for being here today. I want to start off by saying thank you for the briefing that you gave a couple of weeks ago on the Sinaloa Chapitos arrests. I respect the men and women serving our country and putting their lives on the line every day to protect this nation. There's a lot of work that the DEA does to help protect Americans against crime and illegal drugs that we will never know about. So for those sitting behind you with a badge and those unknown in numerous countries around the world, I thank you. You are on the front lines of a war that we are only becoming aware of. In World War II, we lost 418,600 Americans in 3.5 years. That's 305 Americans every day fighting tyranny overseas. And of course, 107,000 overdose deaths last year, if you can call all of them that, 2/3 of which are not, as we have discussed. Those aren't overdoses, those are accidental deaths because of fentanyl. That comes out to 300 a day. So we are at war with the cartels. We are at war in a small way with the Communist Chinese Party. You don't hear about 100,000 Chinese dying from fentanyl overdoses. You don't hear about 100,000 Europeans fighting against or dying from overdoses of fentanyl. This is asymmetric warfare being conducted on us, and it's just one way that the Chinese are trying to hurt our country economically, around the world, in many, many different ways. And from October 1st until now, 14,000 pounds of fentanyl have come across the southwest border, enough to kill 3.1 billion people. You don't have an army big enough to stop that entirely. The border is a problem, but it's not your fault that it's open. But you are left with the mess that we deal with every day. And we know people who have died in all of our communities from this war. And that's what it is. And when we talk about that, I have signed on to H.R. 18, my friend Dan Crenshaw's AUMF against the Mexican cartels, because every problem that we have at the border is controlled by the cartels. The illegal immigration, the evil of human trafficking for whatever they're doing, all of it evil, and the drug overdoses that are coming across our border. And I also know that you have reprioritized, as I understand it, the DEA to defeating the Sinaloa and Jalisco cartels. So this capture of 28, or indictment of 28 and capture of others on a multinational level is really, really impressive. I know you're asking for $2.6 billion. If the AUMF, let's start with what you're asking for now. Are you making a dent? Are you making progress with the money that you're given to do this? Do you have enough people? Are there enough people signing up for your organization to fight this war?
Yeah, Congressman, it's a great question. We need more, and we can do more with more. We are down some agents, and we need as many agents as we can have, as many intel analysts as we can have. We're also starting to hire targeters, financial analysts. The cryptocurrency money laundering that we're seeing is deeply sophisticated, and so we need the men and women and the tools to be able to do it. A lot of what you see us doing now is building these counter threat teams, this strategic layer that goes on top of everything we do. We've built that in Virginia in our intelligence division, and now we're building it in our field divisions. So if we're going to expand that and make sure that we understand every single cartel member who is in the United States, those people we need to investigate and prosecute. Every single cartel member operating around the world, same thing. And really understand the global networks, the entire supply chain from China to Mexico to the US. We need the resources, we need the tools, and part of what we're doing is transforming how we use all of our information. Right now, we have 75 different data sets. That does not work in 2023 to meet this moment. That's why we're building a new mission-wide operational system, and we're working in everything with urgency. Everything is being done with urgency. Every day that goes past, almost 200 Americans are dying from fentanyl. And so every dollar that we are given, I commit to you, we are spending to fight the cartels, to stop fentanyl, and to save American lives.
If an AUMF were to become law and giving the president discretion to go after the cartels militarily, would you be in favor of something like that? Would that help your mission?
Congressman, what I can speak to is what I see as the head of having the privilege of leading the DEA and our 10,000 men and women across the world. Any authority that Congress gives us, we will use to the fullest extent. any authority that you give us. And that's what we're doing right now, is we're trying to use every authority, every piece of information, every dollar to save American lives.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I yield myself my time. We've completed the first round of questions. I think members desire a second round. We will be mindful of your time, and I know that you'll be mindful of our inquiries. So we'll proceed to a second round, and I yield myself such time as I may consume. One of the program enhancement requests in your budget submission was to triple funding for the DEA's Operation Overdrive that Ms. Ming mentioned earlier. That must be terribly important in your view of your job. What does Operation Overdrive do, and how does it fit into the new strategy that you've described to us for the DEA?
Thank you, Congressman. And as we think about what we're doing, our first priority is to defeat the two cartels, Sinaloa and Jalisco, globally. The second piece is looking at how what the cartels are doing is impacting our communities. The significant spike we saw in 2020 of violent crime across the United States. And as all of us, particularly all of us former prosecutors and judges know, drugs and violence are linked together. You cannot separate them. And so we're also looking at drug poisoning deaths in our community, working with local law enforcement to investigate those deaths and bring all of them back to the people responsible in Mexico, the two cartels, whenever we can. So that is the work of Operation Overdrive on the streets of the United States of America. Yesterday, we announced more than 50 arrests in Columbus, Ohio, that were part of a 6-month operation as part of Operation Overdrive. We seized more than 50 weapons off the street. I should note also, though, that in our budget request, it says that funding, I think it's $9 million, is for Operation Overdrive. We would use it both for Operation Overdrive. It's for all of our strategic targeting. It would be used for Operation Overdrive as well as for the counter threat teams that are targeting Sinaloa and Jalisco around the world. We are right now building counter threat teams in all of our field divisions across the United States because all of our special agents in charge want to be able to look across their towns, cities, and states and say, where are the members of Sinaloa and Jalisco here? What is happening in our communities that's related to those two cartels? So that's what that funding is vital for.
So this is actually a local initiative that allows DEA to share data and work more closely with state and local officials in identifying hot zones. I would gather a place like, was it Columbus you mentioned, a hot zone?
Yes, sir. What we did was step back and look at all the data nationally to understand where were the places across our country that are experiencing the most significant increases in murders, in drug-related poisonings, in drug poisonings. Taking examples from phase 1, we looked at Philadelphia, and we've built a data science team, we've built a geospatial team, so we were able to map the city of Philadelphia, sit with the Philadelphia Police Department, and we identified Kensington, Philadelphia as one of the major hotspots. We then did combined enforcement work with alcohol, tobacco, and firearms with the Philadelphia Police Department, and that work, again, led to a more than 40% decrease in fatal shootings. So we know when we have the right information in our communities and we identify the people who are likely to be the next shooters or the person who's likely to be selling the fentanyl that's killing Americans, and we target with precision those individuals, we can significantly make a difference in our communities.
When you use the phrase mapping in an area, what do you mean by that?
So we talk about mapping a lot at DEA lately, and some of it is drawing a bigger picture to understand what's happening and where it's happening. So Philadelphia is an example where we can look across the city and see where are the murders happening, where are the shootings happening, where are people dying of drug poisoning. And again, working with local law enforcement, we can come into a room and say, these are the neighborhoods that are being hardest hit, that where the bulk of violence is happening. We can step back and ask the question, which networks or violent gangs that work with the cartels are responsible for the violence and devastation that we see, and then we proactively target them. And it's very similar to what we're doing worldwide with the cartels. You cannot solve a problem that you don't know you have. You cannot attack the cartels if you don't know where they're operating. You cannot attack the supply chain if you don't know which Chinese chemical companies are involved. So we're taking the time to step back to map all of this globally for the first time, and we've identified thousands of members of those cartels across the world, hundreds of members of these two cartels across the United States, and now we are proactively targeting them.
Thank you. Mr. Cartwright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, Administrator Milgram, you touched in your previous testimony on the public relations, public awareness campaign, and I want to talk about that a little bit. The U.S. and Mexico have committed to developing a bilingual, binational public awareness prevention campaign that educates its citizens, especially young people, on the dangers of synthetic drugs, including fentanyl. And by the way, I agree with the characterization of poisoning for people who are taking fentanyl and don't even know it. Can you elaborate on what role the DEA will play in this public awareness campaign, how it'll leverage existing campaigns such as One Pill Can Kill as part of the effort?
Thank you, Congressman. We started One Pill Can Kill, the One Pill Can Kill campaign, shortly after I came into office, because all of us know that way too many Americans don't know what's happening, and the cartels are acting with deliberate, calculated treachery by making these pills look identical to real prescription medicine. And they've done it to trick Americans into buying those pills without knowing that they have fentanyl, and fentanyl drives addiction. So we launched this campaign in September of 2021, and we also did a series of law enforcement takedowns around it. We made more than 800 arrests in that first September across the country, because when I came in, I was reading law enforcement reports from our incredible men and women in the field, but they were all disconnected. So we were having a drug poisoning death happening in Nebraska. We were having a drug poisoning death happen in North Carolina, in Texas, in California. And we wanted to knit it together so the American public could see the truth of what we see. Now, one thing I'd tell you about One Pill Can Kill, and a number of members of this committee in Congress have been incredibly helpful, I believe, in raising public awareness. We do not brand that. We do not brand it, and we intentionally do that so that we have police departments who've taken the campaign, we have universities who've taken the campaign, we keep all of that on our website, so anyone in America who wants to go into a school and talk about One Pill Can Kill can take any of the information that DEA has. So we'll continue to work with the interagency and others on expanding public awareness. Our signature work has been around the One Pill Can Kill campaign.
All right. We heard talk about our so-called open border, and Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask unanimous consent for the entry into the record of a September 22, 2022 NBC News report entitled "The GOP's Myth of an Open Border. The U.S. borders are guarded by a vast and well-funded national security agency that has grown far larger and more powerful in recent years." And Administrator Milgram, my understanding is that a great weight of fentanyl that's coming across the border is coming across at the points of entry. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
What are we doing about that?
So in the Chapitos investigation, as I've spoken about, we see fentanyl coming in land, air, sea, and tunnel. We definitely see it coming in at ports of entry. We see it coming, essentially any way possible. And at DEA, we spend most of our days and nights working on how we can stop it from even getting to that point. we believe, and I have seen this throughout the entire global supply chain now, that the border is it's an essential part of this conversation. And DHS is responsible for stopping fentanyl at the border. It's a vital part. The way I would say it is we cannot concede any point in the supply chain. We can't concede any point. Coming from precursor chemicals to Chinese money laundering at the back end to the illicit finance. Every piece of this has to be a part of our focus.
Fight them on every front.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I want to bounce over to hiring. It's my understanding that on average it is taking DEA 494 days, or almost a year and a half, to get applicants through the hiring process and onboard them. I'm concerned about that length of time. I don't want DEA or any other federal agency to lose qualified candidates who just can't wait over a year for a job offer. How are you approaching creating efficiencies in your hiring process and reducing the overall time to hire special agents?
Yes, sir. This is a vital question for us. We need more agents. I have committed to 100% staffing, to being at 100% of the agents that Congress gives us the budget to have. We are still taking too long to hire agents, and we are working on it. We created the position of the Associate Administrator of DEA for the first time to have the number 3 person at DEA over all of our business operations to look at how do we speed this up, how do we do it effectively and efficiently and with integrity. And so we are looking at this very question as we speak. And I'd be delighted to work with this committee and to get back to you as we work on it.
Please do. Keep us posted. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Judge Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and in all due respect to my colleagues reading some article about the border, it doesn't take anyone with a third-grade education to see that when 40,000 people cross the border at one time and claim asylum, that we don't have a problem on the Texas border. And 40,000 people cross every day on the border. So yes, they've grown the agency, and the agency's frustrated beyond belief. The Border Patrol is literally doing nothing but processing those people. So I take very much offense with that statement. Ma'am, let me ask you a question. I used to be a judge, that's why they call me judge.
Yes, sir.
And back in 1982, 3, 4, something like that, DPS came to me and told me that every 5th car on I-35 was a drug car. Okay? So they put together a task force to prove it, and wow, I tried drug cases for almost 3 years, solid drug cases. And I was a full jurisdiction court. So I had a lot of other things I had to do besides that. I don't think that has changed. I think I-35 is the artery of the cartels for transporting drugs all the way from Mexico to Canada, and I want to ask you. And DEA, by the way, was associated with all of our task forces we put together, and they did a great job helping us out. I mean, that's a long time ago, but they did a good job, and I'll give them a kudos. I don't know what they're doing now because that's not my job, but I do know that's a corridor. And what are y'all doing on the corridor between Mexico and Canada, I-35?
Thank you, Judge. I've been a state, local, and federal prosecutor, and so I have also seen what you describe, these corridors, and I see it now as the chief of DEA. One of the things that we're seeing the cartels do is bring fentanyl into hubs across the United States. And so some of those are places like San Diego, Los Angeles, Denver, Chicago, Atlanta. Those are the core hubs where fentanyl goes out from. And so we are actively tracking this across the country. again, we're mapping all of those threats. It's important to me that we understand all of the routes that the cartels use, as I think the Chapitos, it's the first example we've been able to make public of our work across the networks. But one of the things we see is that they use various different ways to get drugs into the United States. They use different transportation routes. They are a very diversified criminal organization. And yes, we are actively tracking this. And I think it's an important point of, once the fentanyl is into the United States, how does it spread to all of our other communities?
Well, back in my day, the mules drove the stuff up to Dallas and other places. They were not a highly efficient group. They pretty stupid people. But they got paid a big chunk of money to drive something up there. You're dealing with people that are probably almost as rich as the United States of America. In cash money, they're probably the largest cash operation community in the history of the world. And so, when it's kind of hard when a guy's working for the DEA and making maybe let's say making $150,000 a year, and somebody comes to him with $1 million in cash in a suitcase. You've got a big issue going on right now with some investigations going on. I'm not criticizing you for those investigations at all, but you're dealing with people that have unlimited money. And I think one of the ways DEA has done other things in the past is track the money and shut off the money.
Yes, sir.
And I'd like to know how you're doing that.
Yes, sir. It's a critical question. And one of the things we're doing, I mentioned earlier, hiring additional financial analysts, because the money is very sophisticated. First, there's a lot of Chinese money laundering happening right now. There are numerous reasons why that's happening, including the fact that wealthy Chinese can only get a certain amount of money out of the country legally. And so there is a whole underground banking system that exists. It used to be that across the United States, we saw different forms of money laundering. Now, the bulk of what we see is Chinese money laundering. So there is an illicit finance network happening worldwide. Cryptocurrency, we are finding crypto wallets with wallets and wallets and wallets and wallets behind them. We are tracing, right now, we are actively tracing some of these illicit finance networks to countries across the world, to hundreds of millions of dollars, using multiple cryptocurrency capacities, exchanges. And so this is vital. We are hiring, we have skilled men and women at DEA. We have them sitting on our counter threat teams. We are also hiring more people. We also are very fortunate that the IRS has agreed to give us some of their criminal investigators. Some of the military financial analysts are joining our counter threat team. So we are begging, borrowing, and asking anyone who can help us with this expertise. We also have a lot of men and women at the Department of Justice who have significant expertise in it. So we are doing everything we can to track every single dollar around the world. And it is also one of the ways that we illuminate the criminal network. Some of the money launderers work for both cartels, some work for only one, but this is the kind of information that, as we're using, again, across more than 70 data systems, as we pull it together and start to use it, it allows us to track this globally. It allows us to work with our foreign counterparts and partners. We're going to do as much work as we can ourselves, and we're going to share as much information and work as we can with our counterparts to attack this threat.
And I'm not sure the American public understand that the crypto world of finance is really Jalisco and Sinaloa banker.
Congressman, we see, even in just the Chapitos case, we saw cryptocurrency being used by Sinaloa. We saw bulk cash shipments. We also saw what we call trade-based money laundering, where the cartels, in this example, bought cell phones in the U.S., brought them to Mexico to sell them, and then the proceeds from those sales go back to the drug cartels. So again, they're using every single mechanism, every tool they possibly can to make billions of dollars and to hide that money.
Well, stay at it. Good luck.
Thank you, sir.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Mr.
Thank you,
Ruppersberger?
Mr. Chairman. Just some comments, just listening to the questions that have been asked. First thing I want to address, Mr. Clyde, and maybe to an extent Mr. Garcia, those are tough questions, but that is their job. That we have to have oversight. And I respect that. I might not like it or I might think differently, but that's what makes us look well. And if you look at our history, when we work bipartisan, we do better, and it does. And, luckily I've been lucky enough to be on committees where I've had people on both sides who deal with that. Some of these good friends of mine. But I want to get back to the focus of the drug problem. And those of us who've been years ago, maybe prosecutors, if you've been around as a prosecutor, you're going to do a lot of drug work, as you know. So how do we deal with this? From where I am and trying to keep an eye from your agents, look, when someone new comes in, people are going to be hurt because they're not going to be in the same job they were, and then they might leak or whatever. And I want to focus on what's going to help solve this problem. For years, we have never funded DEA. It's been a problem. I don't know why, and it's yet one of the biggest problems we have, other than the big national security issue. And I see some of that happening now, but let the Inspector General deal with it. I want you focused on what you're focused on right now. That's what you need to do. And I can tell you this from law enforcement, if you're in it, and Judge, you've seen a lot of it too. You have different areas to get money. I think our drug issue was dealt with a lot better when FBI got involved. We teased them, how can you investigate with wingtip shoes? But we put more emphasis into that. But we're going right back again where the cartels are better than they ever were because of money and sophistication and those type of things. So I want to get into artificial intelligence because that's an area, it's a buzzword, but it's something we have to deal with, national security, whatever. And from that point of view, where do you see that taking us? What are the new solutions? How are you adjusting to it? You seem to be very, very smart. I don't know if you are or not, but you seem to know your stuff, so to speak. So can you answer the question on artificial intelligence?
Thank you so much for raising this question of how do we use our data. And I think artificial intelligence or machine learning, whatever sort of version of it we call it, it's basically asking the question of how do we bring together our data to effectively find patterns and to use it to find what's happening and to be able to action information that we have. One of the things that I found when I came into DEA in 2021, and I was surprised to find this because I believe that the men and women of DEA are mission-driven and they're working tirelessly every single day to get this done, to save American lives. I was surprised to find that we had not upgraded our data systems or our case management systems in a real way since the early 2000s. Our budget with Congress stayed mostly flat for almost a decade. We've saw increases in 2018, and then the last 2 years we have had increases. We are using a lot of those increases to build an enterprise-wide data and technology system. We simply cannot, in 2023, have more than 70 different data sources that silo information. They silo our offices across the world. They don't allow someone who's sitting in any of your districts to communicate or understand what's happening in another part of the United States. We cannot have that.
And I think you deserve credit because I know you've been implementing this sophistication. One other thing I want to get into too, and it hasn't been brought up at all, but it's there. I think the best way to deal with the drugs and the strike force is a strike force, federal, state, and local. A lot of the locals, especially in the actual local government or then state, whatever, they don't have the money. One major investigation blows their budget, and that's where the feds come in. And then if you work as a team, now there's only one problem sometimes. It's not often, and it's very rare, but we need to talk about the issue of corruption, especially when you're dealing with drugs, the amount of money that's involved. Where is DEA on the issue of corruption? Have you had any cases? Where do you have any checks and balances systems that can deal with that?
And Congressman,
How much time do I have? Oh, there. Oh, good. Okay. We've asked for that for a long time.
Congressman, you're talking about corruption within the cartels, within the
No, I'm
world.
talking about corruption within DEA.
Within DEA.
And, you know, hard working, I mean, I have a lot of respect for the agents of DEA,
Yes,
putting their lives on the line more than probably, and just as much as our military does.
yes. Congressman, what I would say to you is that all of us, myself, every single member of DEA, we hold our seats in the public trust. I think it's vital. And so we have made a series of changes to our disciplinary process at DEA to make sure that we are taking very seriously any incidents that occur, particularly serious misconduct. What I am interested in, and there was a bit of conversation about the foreign review and some of the prior scandals at DEA, I've read those reports. I have those reports. We've conducted internal investigations at DEA. What I am most interested in is how do we build the correct piping going forward to have early warning systems in place so that we know if problems are happening and we can stop them and catch them early. How do we go from a system where we used to be tracking the use of money that we do for our money laundering investigations on an after those cases were done, to now where we have a real-time system that our entire inspections team can see every single day, to building this mission-wide operating system that allows us to build in early warning systems and see across the agency to make sure that if we have problems, we fix them, and if we need to hold people accountable, we hold people accountable. I will also say to you that I have never worked with more committed people than the men and women of DEA, and this transformation we're doing together.
Thank you. Yield back.
Mr. Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Administrator, I just want to be clear that I'm not asking these questions to be combative. You know that, hopefully. This isn't personal, but I do want you to be successful, and I think being successful in this role requires you to be honest and assertive and courageous with your leadership, right? Your bosses and the cabinet and the administration that you work for. I want you to succeed here because we need the agents in the field to succeed in doing their jobs, and I don't think they can do that without you being successful. So I ask these questions in the spirit of us collectively getting to solutions and resources to help you execute those solutions. I'm very grateful for the badged DEA agents in the field doing God's work on a daily basis and providing us that security blanket. But we've got to get you whole from a budget perspective and a resource perspective. But the strategy has to come first. The tactics thereafter as well. And so, I ask these questions because it's very important for me to have trust in you, right? That you understand the strategy and the vision and the need. Do you believe? And I want to go back to this statement that the ranking member made earlier about the open border being a myth. You don't believe that the open border is a myth, right?
Congressman, what I believe, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the border, as I've said, I think it's an essential part of this conversation. And what I see happening as the head of DEA is I see every single day that fentanyl is coming into the United States across the border, by air, by land, by sea, and that we need to be doing everything we can to stop it.
Okay. I'll take that as you don't see it as a myth. You recognize there's an open border, hopefully. I live in a border state. California is a border state. The documents that you have with some of the drug seizures, about 75% of them are in Southern California. This is a real problem. I sit on the Defense Subcommittee within Appropriations. I sit on the House Permanent Select Committee for Intelligence. By the way, we had a great classified briefing from the intelligence community that unfortunately we had the DIA, the NSA, the FBI, the CIA there, and no DEA rep who was invited, but no presence there. I don't know how we have a classified intelligence brief on the threat at the southern border without the DEA, which I would argue is the primary recipient of the intelligence and probably the most critical operator on the southern border in terms of the fentanyl crisis. So I would encourage you to be responsive to the Intel Committee when we ask to have briefs brought in. It's a very bipartisan committee that we do seek answers there as well. On the issue of the cartels, I think the fundamental problem we have, and this is why I know you've been focusing on the supply chain, we have effectively an infinite return on investment for the cartels right now. This isn't like
cocaine or marijuana, where there's a cost basis. They've got to grow, they've got to buy the land or procure the land, they've got a workforce to cultivate it and harvest it and then traffic it. This is basically free precursor material, free being pennies, that is then sold for $30 a pill in some cases. And so I don't think this model of going after the heads of the cartels or even the leadership of the cartels is going to work as long as the ROI is effectively 10,000%, which is what fentanyl is right now. Margins on fentanyl are 10,000%. We have to go over this after the supply chain, and it starts in China. Okay, so I need you to recognize that China is an illicit drug trafficker. They're bringing these things in. We had Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo here last week, and I posed to her the scenario: if we knew we had VX or sarin gas on a boat coming from China to Mexico with the intent to deploy that chemical weapon across our borders and into the United States, ultimately designed to kill 100,000 Americans, we would intercept that boat offshore before it got to Mexico. I would submit that fentanyl is no different. This is a chemical weapon of mass destruction, a man-made chemical weapon of mass destruction. The precursors are coming from China into Mexico with the intent to put them in a pill format in Mexico, move across our border, and sell them to Americans. You need to work with Gina Raimondo, the DOD, and whoever you need to, CBP, to intercept these ships before they get to Mexico. If you don't do this, it doesn't matter how many cartel members you put in prison. 8 certainly isn't going to do it. 1,000 won't do it. This pill has infinite margins as far as they're concerned. They will continue to kill and traffic. I would also say you need to arrest Americans who deal this drug. You said the cartels are evil. The dealers in the United States that knowingly sell fentanyl that is killing people on a daily basis. We have dealers in Los Angeles who sold a pill. The kid died that evening, and then sold a pill from the same batch and texted the customer saying, hey, this killed Sally last night. Make sure someone's with you when you take this pill. The dealers in the United States are also evil, and they need to be charged with the 10-year minimum sentence, treated with federal felony charges, just like we do the cartel members. If you don't do that, if you don't go after the supply chain, you're just going to have an infinite war with these cartels, and they're going to make it rain longer than you can tread water.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Mr. Elsie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to point out that as I think about what we're talking about here today, and y'all capturing so many of these bad folks on this operation, the Chapitos investigation, by raising your right hand, you have made yourself a target for bad actors around the world, you and your family. I know you have a family. And for everybody sitting here, you do that every day, and you're going to live with that for the rest of your life. So it takes a great deal of bravery to say yes to a nomination like this, and I thank you for it. Congressman Garcia and I flew combat overseas together, in case you didn't know. 2003, we flew together flying Super Hornets in Iraq, delivering what we call warheads on foreheads to our enemies overseas. And so I think it's extremely frustrating as we have these conversations that we know that we have these enemies here, that we know that they're killing our kids in our backyards. Age 18 to 45, number one killer in our country. And on this investigation, on the slideshow that y'all prepared, the first 8 places are in Southern California, right close to where he lives, so none in Texas. So I think that's really interesting, and that's one of the reasons he and I are so passionate about saving Americans overseas. We took a risk or saving Americans here. We took a risk overseas, and these people are taking out more than we've lost in World War II, and that's going to continue. I mean, when we hit year 4, we're going to surpass more deaths than we lost in World War II, based on this, if we don't turn this ship around. So what I'd like to know is, as you're doing these operations, is Mexico cooperating with your mission? Or are they hindering, or are they so corrupt? What I'd like to know is, are they a failed narco state?
So, Congressman, let me speak to a couple different points that you just raised. The first is, the Chapitos is the first example publicly of our work across the networks, and there's more to come, but I could not agree more that we have to be doing this work globally. When it comes to an investigation like this was a DEA investigation. So We did our work to target the precursor chemical suppliers. We did our work to target in Mexico the people making the fentanyl, the people trafficking it into the U.S., the assassins and the weapons people, and the leadership in Mexico. And then in the U.S., these distribution hubs where fentanyl is coming out from. So this investigation, it was actually, I'm very proud of the men and women of DEA. It was done by our bilateral investigations unit with 32 DEA offices around the world, everybody pulling together as one DEA. So that's the way this operation took place. And
I'd like to point out, it's a victory for you. It's a small one in this larger war, but it's a victory.
It's just the beginning of our work. It's just the beginning of our work. And what I would say as clearly as I could is we all have to do more. We are working to do more, and we want the Mexicans to work with us, and we want them to do more. Because as you see from the Chapitos, Mexicans are also dying. The people in the United States, we know the Chapitos are sending fentanyl they know will kill Americans. That has to stop. And so our top priority right now is getting these people arrested and to stand justice in the United States, but everything we are doing is how do we defeat those two cartels that are based in Mexico.
Is Mexico cooperating to the fullest? Or are there players in that government that you don't want to deal with because you know they're corrupt?
So, Congressman, we follow the evidence wherever it goes, and corruption is a part. Look, we did an investigation and an arrest and extradition of JOH, Juan Orlando Hernandez, the former president of Honduras, and we follow that evidence. We've also charged, as you know, Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela, and so DEA does not back down from doing that kind of work, and we will continue to follow the facts and the evidence wherever it takes us. As part of the Chapitos indictment, we talk about the corruption. We talk about the corruption that fuels narcotics trafficking in Mexico and globally. And so again, wherever the evidence and the facts take us, we will go.
Okay. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. That concludes today's hearing. Thank you, Madam Administrator, for attending and answering the questions. Without objection, all members will have 7 days to submit additional written questions for the witness or additional material for the record. And with that, the hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.